So when it comes to incarnations of the Doctor that we haven't seen enough of on screen, I think the one actor that instantly comes to mind, for me at least, is Paul McGann, who brought to life the dashing 8th Doctor in the TV movie back in 1996, as well as a short minisode for the 50th anniversary back in 2013, and a cameo in Power of the Doctor. But outside of that, the 8th Doctor has gotten a lot of love in the expanded media. Listeners of Big Finish will know this quite well. Stories such as Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition, Ravenous 4, and companions including Lucy Miller, Charlie Pollard, and even Mary Shelley, who have all been a part of the 8th Doctor's adventures in some form or another. Now, if you're a long-term viewer of the channel, you'll know that some time ago I talked about the possibility of a series centred around McGann's Doctor potentially being in the works. Sadly, it seems these rumours have turned out to be false, but moving on. Now, Who at the moment is currently in a very vulnerable state, with no work being done on the show, the Sea Devil spin-off planned to air at an undetermined point as well, and the BBC searching for a new streaming partner, and if certain rumours are to be believed, then maybe even a new production crew as well. Anyway, to try and provide some well-needed distraction, I thought a good use of everyone's time would be to stray away from talking about the show's current state and instead discussing an underrated and much beloved variant of the Doctor. Let's talk about it. Now, as mentioned previously, I have actually talked about ideas surrounding an 8th Doctor series before. Just before the 60th anniversary specials aired, I talked about the rumours of McGann's Doctor finally getting a series, as well as theorising what it could entail, and in that video I discussed my initial thoughts on the news, the timeline, difficulties with Big Finish, what villains could be used, as well as finding a suitable format for the series itself. Now, this is essentially more of a quote-unquote part 2 to that video, but here I'd like to update and expand upon a few points that I made previously in that video. So things like the timeline and the villains will be discussed again, whilst I'll be expanding upon my points regarding the expanded media and the format that I feel this show would have to be shown in. So when talking about bringing the 8th Doctor back into the live action medium, one point of discussion is where exactly it would fit into the timeline. At least regarding the live action side of things for now, the major event in between the TV movie and the start of Modern Who in 2005 was the Time War. Off screen, Russell T Davies created this event to explain why there was such a long absence between the classic and new series of Who. Regarding the expanded media side of things, that leaves us with less room in the timeline to work with. For one thing, we've got Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition, Ravenous, and countless other adventures with the Doctor during this period of his life. But despite that, there are some gaps in the timeline for us to retcon in a few quote-unquote unseen adventures. This is where we could potentially crowbar in some new adventures with McGann's Doctor that we haven't yet seen. Of course, there is the companion side of things as well. Now, in the expanded media, 8 has had quite a variety of companions, including Lucy Miller, Tamsin Gregg, Charlie Pollard, and countless others. However, this all depends on the timing, because if this were to be set closer to the start of the Time War, then we could either have the 8th Doctor travelling alone, or he picks up a new companion for the story. And another option could see Bliss, played by Raki Thakrar, make the jump to live action, which brings me on to my next point. Now, I talked about Big Finish previously, but here is where I would like to bring a few more things to people's attention. Now, one reason we haven't seen characters from Big Finish stories like Bernice Summerfield, later incarnations of the Meddling Monk, or in particular a lot of the 8th Doctor's companions appear in the new series, is mainly down to rights issues. Now, this isn't an issue limited to just the show, as a lot of the Doctor Who merchandise has also been limited to this as well. And whilst we have had a few Doctor Who action figures based on Big Finish stories previously, they were released back in 2019 I believe, and since then we haven't seen many other figures based on their stories since. Now, seeing figures based on Big Finish such as Alex McQueen's Master, Lucy Miller, Charlie Pollard, or even a Malloy Davros from Time War 4 are all very unlikely, just mainly due to all the red tape when it comes to the rights issues surrounding Big Finish characters from the Whoniverse. This also rules out an idea that was floated originally when the rumours of a McGann series were floated nearly 2 years ago, that being the possible adaptation of these audio stories for TV. With the rights issues I mentioned previously, this makes Big Finish adaptations very unlikely, whether they be in live action or animated form. The latter I would like to see, but again, rights issues. Now, despite Big Finish being off the table, this doesn't mean there aren't more forms of expanded media that we can look to. For one thing, the 8th Doctor, much like a majority of his other incarnations, has had quite a presence in book form. The 8th Doctor adventure books were the first look into 8 adventures after the TV movie, and proved to have a lasting impact, with some stories actually being adapted for Big Finish, like Minaret in Hell, and other stories such as Legacy of the Daleks and War of the Daleks, attempting to fill in narrative gaps within the show, such as the fate of Delgado's master and how the Daleks continued to survive after Remembrance. Now, adapting expanded media such as books and comics is actually easier than it looks, simply because there wouldn't be as much red tape or any rights issues that prevent this from happening. For example, Pat Mill and Dave Gibbons, who wrote Doctor Who and the Starbeast back in the 70s, were credited by Russell when he adapted that story in particular for television. And in some cases, the writer of the book/comic has even come on board to adapt their work for the show, with Paul Cornell, who wrote Human Nature, being brought on by Russell to work on a TV adaptation of the story, but for the 10th Doctor instead of the 7th. Now, I've mentioned the story First Frontier from the Virgin New Adventures range before, and I think seeing that adapted for the 8th Doctor would also be quite interesting. Obviously, a lot of retooling would have to be done to incorporate McGann's Doctor, and perhaps changing Ace into a different companion that suits the story. And that then brings us onto the villains of the story. Who would the 8th Doctor be facing? Now, in his adventures on Big Finish, the 8th Doctor has taken on the Doom Coalition, the Ravenous, the Cybermen, and of course the Daleks, which has been a rite of passage for almost every Doctor, unfortunately excluding Ncuti Gatwa. Now, given the narrative gaps in 8's timeline specifically, I think it's possible to perhaps retcon in some encounters with other classic monsters. Some foes that the 8th Doctor is yet to face, to the best of my knowledge, include the Ice Warriors, the Nestene Consciousness, the Zygons, and countless others. Now, for reasons that will become quite apparent, two foes I would like to keep out of an 8th Doctor series or project in future are the Daleks and the Master. The former because the Time War by this point would have either already begun or was fast approaching. And I think that because 8 has had a few encounters with the Daleks before in audio and in comic form, I think it would be best to actually leave these villains out of a potential project for now. And the Master I would keep out of it for similar reasons, namely because his story leading up to the Time War has already been told with the Ravenous, Day of the Master, as well as the comics and the War Master stories on Big Finish. Okay, so we've discussed a few points that I mentioned in my previous video on this subject, but what format would an 8th Doctor project be presented in? Now, I wouldn't say a minisode because we already have Night of the Doctor for that, and I think a full series of 10 episodes would be a bit too much. With that in mind, I think a 5-episode miniseries would work much better, as it would provide the time to show us more of what makes McGann's incarnation a Doctor worth getting invested in. Plus, it gives those not invested in the expanded media a chance to see what this version of the character is capable of. Another idea I want to actually bring up, which is sort of separate from the rest of the video, is perhaps getting something 8th Doctor related in 2026, to celebrate 30 years since the release of the TV movie. We could have the 8th Doctor in a short episode, perhaps visiting Grace and Chang Li, reminiscing of the events of the TV movie itself. Or better yet, if Tales of the TARDIS is still going and hasn't been abandoned yet, then I think an episode dedicated to the TV movie itself to celebrate 30 years since its release, with Paul McGann, Daphne Ashbrook, Yi So, and possibly Eric Roberts all returning for it. I think it would be something very interesting to get fans of that project in particular on board for the show. But that concludes the second part of my thoughts on making an 8th Doctor spin-off and how to go about it. If you guys have any further thoughts on this, then let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, be sure to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss any other videos like this one. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you very soon.